Welcome back everyone to the React In-Depth series. In this video, we're going to go over a bunch of exercises together to go over what we went in the last video, which was stateless components in React. As I mentioned, a lot of these topics, we're going to need to really go through a bunch of exercises to really ingrain into our minds and get some muscle memory for some practice with some of these concepts, because they're definitely going to start ramping up in complexity as we go through them. So in the previous video, we went over stateless components, how to build out components in React using functional components and actually returning JSX, and even using variable names inside of the actual function body to use in curly brackets within the JSX. So in this video, we're going to go over a warm-up exercise, 3 different exercises, as well as a bonus exercise because I couldn't help myself. So let's follow along with me together in this video as we go through these exercises. Okay, so to start here, let me just switch over to my VS Code. As with kind of all the other series and videos I've made, all of this is in the GitHub repo for this particular series. So you can either copy that or clone it down, or you can just pause the video as we go through this and actually just read the instructions and try it out yourself, whichever is easiest for you. So to start, what I've done is created a warm-up exercise really to make sure that we understand the workflow of how to go through these exercises, and then we can actually go through all of them right after that. So to start with the warm-up, what I'd like you to do is create a new React project using Vite. Okay, so you can do the whole like npm create Vite at latest and then kind of go through the prompts, or do the full command in your terminal and then actually get that project up and running. Once you have that up and running, make the app.jsx file that's kind of included inside of the default Vite bundle that you download. Return a UL tag with at least 3 li tags inside of it, which is going to simulate a navbar. Okay, we actually did this previously in the previous video, so this is just to get our fingers warmed up. So hopefully you can do this without actually looking back to the best of your ability. And then once you have that, make sure to save it and then switch over to the browser and make sure it actually renders properly as you would expect, since that's kind of the default thing that's exposed to the root element in React by default in Vite at least. Once you've done that, just for fun, I'd like you to get some practice kind of poking around in some other places. Try to remove the CSS or styling imports from both the app and the main files, and resave those files to make sure that all of the styling gets wiped out from the app. We're going to be doing this quite often going forward, so it's good to get kind of your hands dirty with that, just so that you can actually get a sense for how styling actually works by default in React with regular CSS files. So pause the video, go ahead and give that a try, and then when you're done, come back and we'll go through a solution together. Okay, so to start, I'm just going to open up my terminal here. So I'll do a new terminal, and hopefully you can see that. And I think I can maybe zoom in even more. That's probably a bit too much. I'll zoom in out there. I'll do npm create, and I'll say Vite at latest. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a React project, and I'm going to actually just use it for all of these exercises. So I'm not constantly creating new Vite projects for each of these, since each of them can be quite big with all the npm packages that we need to install. Now, you can absolutely do a separate project for each of these. It doesn't really matter too much. Just be aware that there is some amount of space that's used by maybe like 100 megabytes or more per each of these that we actually put on our machine. So whatever's easiest for you, I'm just going to do it this way just to save a little bit of space, but you can actually create a new project for each one. So I'm going to do Vite at latest. It's going to give me a couple of prompts to go through. I'll just call this exercise solutions. You can call it whatever you like. I'm going to press enter. I'm going to go with React, press enter there, go with JavaScript, and then it's going to kind of dump me into the instructions. So I'm going to cd into exercise solutions. And if I ls in here, you'll see that there are all of these files, which I expand this folder. You should be able to see here on the left-hand side. And this is what we've been seeing in the previous videos together. So I'm going to run an npm install in here. And while that's going on, I'm going to open the source directory. I'll open the assets because we're going to use that later. We can see that our main and our app.jsx files are in here. So that's what I was mentioning here. Make the app.jsx file return a UL instead of the with 3 LIs inside of it, instead of the stuff that it's returning right now by default. So the npm install is done there. I'm going to run npm run dev just to start that dev server in the background, so that when I switch over to my browser, it actually is showing what we are changing on our screen. So if I open that up in my browser, I'll zoom in here a little bit, just so it's super obvious what we're seeing, that probably can go even further. There we go. We have Vite at React and then some of the other stuff that we see over there. And I'll open my terminal just to use just in case if we do need to see that later on. Okay, so that's great. So we have that kind of running to start. I'm going to close this and kind of let us do Sing in the background. I'm not going to exit the terminal. It's still running in the background, just without showing on my screen here. So what I'm going to do is for this exercise, I'm going to switch over to app.jsx and I'm going to make it return this UL with 3 LIs inside of it. So app.jsx is over here. I'm going to get rid of this state. I'm going to get rid of everything inside of this return tag. And I'm going to return instead a UL tag. And inside there, I'm going to make an LI tag and I'm going to make 3 of these. And I'm going to say there, hello, my, and then I'll say friends. Great, and I'll save that. And now just to recap again, just so we see the flow of how this is working, if we go to main.jsx, what we'll see is that this is kind of the mount point or the start of the root of our application in React, and it's getting element by ID root, which I'll show you in a second from the index.html, and it's mounting our React app inside of there using app, which we're importing from app.jsx, which is what we just rewrote over here. And there's a bunch of stuff in here we can get rid of in a second, but most importantly, it's returning our UL with our 3 LIs inside of there. So if I switch to Chrome, what we'll see, again, with the formatting, since we haven't removed the styling yet, is hello, my friends, as 3 ULs. And if we open up the body, open up the div with the root, we will see there is our UL with our 3 LIs inside of it, each with their own content. So that works pretty well. Now to do that last part of the warm-up, how do we get rid of all the formatting or the styling over here? Well, we can see that there's app.css that's being imported here. So we can either comment that out or just get rid of it. In fact, all this stuff up here, I'm just gonna get rid of, and I'm gonna resave that. And if I switch back, we'll see that that changes some of the styling, but not all of it. There's still some kind of styling for this entire page. So if I switch back here and go to main.jsx, we'll see that main itself is also using a CSS file right here. And if you're interested, you can look through the CSS files, app.css or index.css has all the styling that is actually being applied to that page. So for example, for index.css, you can see probably color scheme light dark, right? So that's kind of what's showing that dark background. I'm assuming, hopefully I'm correct on that one. You can play around with this if you like to actually get things to change. What I'm going to do is just make sure that I know that if I either comment this out or delete it and I resave the file there, that all of the default styling that comes with Vite in this React project is gone. And now we would just expect a vanilla kind of UL tag with our 3 LIs inside of it with no CSS applied. Perfect. So hopefully you got that one. There's, as you can see, quite a lot of steps to get up and running, but this is definitely easier these days than it used to be and a bit faster as well. And this process of kind of starting up a new project and then going into the components and changing stuff and changing CSS, adding CSS, getting the different imports and exports, we're actually going to get more and more familiar with that as we kind of go through not only the exercises, but the videos together as well. Okay, so that was this. That was a warm-up. We're good to go on that one. That looks great. Let's check out exercise 1 together. Okay, so again, as I mentioned for this one, I'm always going to put this at the top of each of these, create a new project using Vite. I'm just going to reuse the existing project and just change some names around. So just a fair warning for you there. You can choose what you like. Now what I'd like you to do is download an image like a PNG or a JPEG off the internet and put it into the SRC, so the source/assets folder of the project. So that's this one right here, right? Source/assets. Right now we have react.svg in there. So just dump an image, copy and paste the file into there so that you can actually use it in the project. Once you have that, what I want you to do is make the app.jsx component that we just changed around. I want you to switch it around so it returns an image tag that displays the image that we just downloaded, which is coming from here. Then once you're done that, add an h1 tag as well as a title above the image and make sure it works in the browser. Now this is definitely a bit more challenging, a lot more steps going on. We haven't worked with images before, at least together in this course. And there are a couple of things to keep in mind and errors you're going to run into as you try this. This is purely meant so that you can actually start Googling for how to do this, and we'll do this together the first couple of times just so you can see kind of the thought process and how this works if you were to kind of try to figure this stuff out yourself for the first time. So I encourage you to give this a shot. Do a bunch of Googling as you do this and try out different things. Don't worry if you see errors. Totally normal and natural. And eventually, hopefully you get it working or you get close. Once you've done that, come back here and let's take a look at a solution together. All right, so I'm first going to go and download an image. So I'm going to go to Google here and I'm going to check out my favorite animal here, a monkey. I'll go to images. I'll pick a nice cute one over here. Let's see. These are all so cute. Look at all these guys. Oh man. Okay, I'm gonna go with, look at the shocked monkey face over here. I'll right click, open a new tab. Now, generally I'd encourage you to be a bit careful with kind of how you download copyrighted images and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, fair warning there. Don't kind of post copyrighted images on public websites, but as you're experimenting with things locally, like what we're doing right now, totally fine. There are websites that you can download like stock images with different copyright protections on them that are a bit more open, so you can be a bit more kind of careful with how you actually get these things so you don't get like sued or anything by people. So yeah, go ahead and try. I'm going to download this locally, so I'm going to kind of right click and I'll save image as, and I'm going to put that into my folder here. So I'm going to kind of navigate through this. You can kind of ignore this part right here. Lots of folders, lots of files, assets, and I'm going to also rename the file to monkey.jpg. Perfect. Cool. So once that's done, that's downloaded. I'm going to switch back over here and you can see that I have monkey.jpg. So if I double click on that, what we'll see is our wonderful monkey face. And now we have that file locally available for our project to actually use. So once that's done, let's see if we can actually get this in an image tag. And then we actually mentioned that there should be an H1 as well above it, right? So we want to have an image tag for this, as well as an H1 tag as a title above the image. So I'm going to come back to my app.jsx. I'm actually just going to comment this part out for now. And I'll label this as this was the warm-up exercise, just so that when I commit this to the repo, everyone can see that that's kind of for the first exercise, and this is exercise 1 over here. All right. Now, what do we want to do? Well, I want to return an image tag. So how do I do that? So let's try this. I'm going to return an IMG, and I know that an IMG is going to have like a source attribute, right? So off the top of my head, what I'm going to try, I'll zoom in a little bit here. What I'm going to try to do is probably have an SRC, and I'm going to say equals, and I'll say, okay, well, like maybe /, and then assets / monkey.jpg. Like that's kind of where this is relative to where kind of like this app.jsx is located, right? So / means current folder, assets, and then monkey.jpg is the name of that file. So if I switch back to my Vite project, what we'll see is that this doesn't quite work, right? I have this kind of like not found, not showing image default. It might be different depending on what operating system or browser you're using, but we'll see that, you know, this asset is not actually displaying. We're not seeing our wonderful monkey like over here. So how do we fix this? What's wrong? So let me kind of go back to Google and I'll see like kind of what would be the process to actually get this solved. So I'll say React IMG, or I'll say display image tag, I guess. You know, like there's many different things that you can probably Google. I'll probably say, I'll also scroll down to Stack Overflow here. How do I reference a local image in React? And I'll zoom in a little bit just so everyone can read that. Let's go down to a solution. Here it says, okay, first of all, wrap the SRC in some curly brackets. So we know that we can evaluate JavaScript with curly brackets. So that's interesting. Next thing, if you're using Webpack, well, we haven't really seen what that is. Instead of this, you may need to use require. Okay, interesting. Another option would be first import the image like this, import logo. Okay, this looks something we can probably use, or const. Okay, and then we can just kind of plug it in, as they say, to this image. So let's try that. So I'm going to say up here at the very top of app, I'm going to kind of do the same thing. I'm going to say import, and I'll say monkey image from, and I'll say /assets / monkey.jpg. right? So that's this one right here, assets monkey.jpg. And then it's saying, well, just directly plug that in, but instead of using a string here, right? If you recall this Stack Overflow article, it's just saying the src equals, and then you kind of plug it in as a variable for that src attribute. So if I switch back here, let's see if that works. I'll put equals, and then I'll put my monkey image, just like that, and I'll save that. Okay, so this kind of seems like a roundabout way of doing it. If you really think about it, this seems a bit weird, because really the only difference here is that we kind of move this up to the top as an import, and we give it a name, right? And then from there, we just kind of plugged in the name. So it's almost the same as what we had before. We're just using an import now. So let's switch back to Chrome and go back to our Vite app. And oh my goodness, there is our monkey. It is actually showing correctly, okay? Now, this is one of many different ways that you can actually get images working inside of React. And this is also one of many different ways that you could actually find a solution to putting an image inside of our JSX. I just showed you one of them. And this is a kind of a common flow. Look at an article, look at a blog post, look at Stack Overflow and try to figure it out. Also looking at documentation usually is my preferred way, but if I see a quick solution in one of the Google results like this, in this case, that's pretty applicable, I'll actually jump to it and see if that solution works, if it's pretty quick to implement. Now, this doesn't really solve what we wanted, because we also wanted to put an H1 above this, if you remember. Now, recall that from our components video, we can't return sibling components without a single parent component. So in a React component, we can only return one parent element that has children inside. So I'm actually going to return a fragment here, and I'm going to move this up inside the fragment. Okay, so what this is going to look like is this. I'm going to have a React fragment. This is a short form to the React fragment. I'm going to put the image in here. And what this is going to allow me to do is now I can put my H1 inside here. And I'll say, awesome monkey, and I'll just put a little monkey emoji. Okay, now this works because I have two sibling components, but I have one parent component. What we could have done is put a div here as well, but I don't want that. I just want to be a flattened kind of DOM tree. I don't want to have extraneous kind of divs in there because I'm not using it for styling right now. So I'm just going to use a React fragment in this case, which is going to flatten this tree once it gets inserted into the DOM. And now if I switch back here, look at that. We have my awesome monkey as a header. And then we have image src equals this monkey right here. You can see that since I'm super zoomed in, I think like 300% or something, this is our image right below our H1 tag, but it appears correctly inside of the DOM. Okay, and you can see I accidentally put a semicolon at the end there, which is showing up, and now it's gone. Okay, great. Cool, so that is exercise 1. I hope that you kind of eventually were able to get to a solution there. This was really meant as an exercise to figure out how to Google things and actually poke around in different documentation and also get an import working for a specific type of asset. Let's take a look at exercise 2 together. All right. So for this one, again, you can reuse the same project or create a new project. I would like you to download an image and put it inside of the src assets again. You can reuse the same image if you want or choose a different image. But this time what I'd like you to do is make a new JSX file and call it card.jsx with a capital C. Okay, so all React components need to start with a capital letter. And make a card function, a similar capital C card, inside of this file that we just created, that we're going to create. And we want this to return kind of like what you'd expect as like a card. And when I say card, you know how you kind of have like different search results, like maybe if you think of like Instagram or even Google sometimes, depending on if you're mobile or on desktop or YouTube or something like that, we'll get like different kind of square or rectangular components that have like a profile picture or some image on top and then maybe some description below it. We're trying to create kind of that component so we can reuse it. So this card component is going to return an image tag at the top, and we can we're just going to use we're going to hard code it to be the one that we download. I'll just reuse my monkey in this case, and then below that we're going to put an H2 tag with your name. Okay, so in this case that'll be Nader for me, and below that H2 I'm going to put a little P tag that has some text about you, so like a little bio or something. Okay, so you can imagine you're making like a like a profile kind of card for yourself. Eventually in the future, we'll see how we can reuse this for different purposes. But for now, we're just going to hard code it to have our content. Once you have that done, since this is a brand new file, you're going to want to make sure to export this function and then import it into main.jsx and replace the app with your card. Now, we haven't really looked at component composition, which we're going to look at in a future video, but this is just a small kind of intro to that concept before we get too deep into it. Hopefully you can see how you could just kind of replace this with card, and then that should work, assuming you actually name the component card and import it that way as well. And then once you're done with all that, switch over to your browser and make sure it actually renders correctly as you would expect. So a few steps here. This is going to kind of be a bit more of a complicated component. Give that a shot, and then we'll go through it together. Okay, so I'm going to come in here in my source folder. I'm going to create a card.jsx. I would highly recommend you use JSX instead of JS. It really helps with syntax highlighting and the compiler, depending on what kind of bundler you're using, like Vite in this case. And there's some other benefits that come with it. So I highly encourage you to use JSX files instead of JS, although some allow you to use just JS files. So we're going to create a function. I'm going to call this card, and I'm going to make sure to export default card. You can export it not as default, but usually if it's the only function in that file or only component in that file, you don't have other things you need to export, you're probably going to export it as default usually. That's usually the convention. And what I want to do is I want to import that image. So I'm going to say import, I'll just again call it monkey image from /assets/monkey.jpg. And if you use a different file, make sure to rename it as such. So what we want is we want basically, we want to show, let me just show you kind of what we want. We want our image tag. Then below that, we want our h2 tag. Then below that, we want our paragraph tag. And then this entire thing together is a card. Okay, so this is a card. And in the future, we can kind of reuse this and we can map over cards, make a whole bunch of cards, one for each person or each thing or element, and it can have different data for each of these. But for now, we're just going to hard code it. So let's see how we can do that. Let's start returning. And I know that this is going to be a multi-line JSX, so I'm just going to start with some parentheses here. And I know that since I want to return multiple sibling elements, I need to actually wrap it inside of another element. It could be a div. Again, as I said in the previous videos, if I don't want to actually have that styled for now, I'm just going to wrap it in a React fragment. Then I'm going to put in my image tag here. And then I'm going to put in my h2, that's an h1, h2 tag. And yeah, and then I'm going to have my p tag as well. Typing is really difficult when you're recording at the same time. Okay, now let's see how we can get this to work. So for the image, we did this in the previous one. So we know that we can do src equals, and instead of using quotes, we're going to put JavaScript in here. We're going to actually put in our monkey image, which is what I named my import for that image asset. Okay. Then what I want to do is inside here, I said we want to put our name. So I'm going to put Nader. Then below that, I'm going to put a bio of myself. Nader really likes monkeys, ... and then I'll put my little monkey emoji. Oh no, where'd it go? There it is. Okay. And I'll save this. Okay, and my prettier is actually going to reformat this just so it saves some space. It doesn't really matter too much if there's spacing or no spacing. The main thing is that you actually have parentheses and then the fragments, and you're returning all of this together as one block of JSX. Now notice that we've exported this. Now if I switch back to Chrome, nothing has changed. Right? We're still seeing awesome monkey and then image from our previous exercise. And that's because we are not actually using card anywhere yet. We just created this component and we haven't actually used it. So where would we want to use this? Well, we want to go to main.jsx in this case. And instead of importing app from app.jsx, we want to replace this with card. So we basically want to say card like that. So how do we get that to actually work? Well, I'm going to say import card from ./card.jsx, just like that. And remember to actually include the extension. In other bundlers like Create React App, you can actually ignore the extension, but this is kind of goes against ES modules and a lot of the modern syntax. So make sure to include the extension just so it's extra clear what type of file you're including. Now we're telling React, hey, at the root, ignore app. So don't even bother putting app in there. Only put card directly in there. And it's going to come in here, execute our card function, return this JSX, and effectively copy and paste all of this into here, and then render it to the screen. So let's see what happens if I switch back to Chrome. All right, so kind of a change, right? So let me zoom out a little bit here on this side, just so we can actually see that, right? So we can see that this is our card, right? If I come over here, we can see that it's been totally flattened, right? There's because of the fragment, there's no surrounding element on these, and I have my H2 and then my P tag. If I did want to surround this in an element, for example, instead, so I could actually like style it, I could probably put like a div on here, just like that. And if I save that and switch back, now you can see that this is all wrapped up nicely inside a div, which I can actually style this entire thing if I want using CSS. All right, hopefully that makes sense. Let's take a look at exercise 3 together. Okay, so now that we're kind of warmed up and have some experience with returning JSX and making components and exporting and importing and even media, I'm going to ramp it up a little bit. Again, I'd like you to create a React project or reuse the existing one. Create a new JSX file again for this exercise, and this time we're going to call it cars.jsx instead of card. And I just realized it's really close to card, but just with an S. And I'd like you to make the cards function inside of there. That's a regular that has a regular JavaScript array as a variable inside of the function with 5 different car brands. So inside of the function now, we're going to be adding JavaScript above where we're returning JSX. So we're going to do like const cars, for example, and it's going to be an array of strings where each string is like a car brand that you know, and we're going to have 5 of those. So 5 strings in this array, and you can call it whatever you like. Okay. Now the goal of this exercise is to make it so the JSX for this cars component, because we need to return JSX for a component, right? We want to make it so that we can return a paragraph for each of the cars in that list of car brands. So we have like a paragraph, for example, let's say I have Ford in there. It would be a paragraph with just Ford as text inside of the paragraph. And then maybe the next one below it would be Tesla, etc., etc. Okay, so we want this to return 5 car brands, one after the other, all as paragraphs where each paragraph is one of the car brands. Okay? And once you have that working, I'd like you to export this and import it into the main, just like we did with cars, and then replace app and make sure it actually displays 5 paragraphs inside of the browser once you have this done. So definitely a bit more challenging, a lot more going on. Give that a shot, and then we'll go through it together. Okay, so to start, I'm going to come up here in src. I'm going to create a new file. I'll call this cars.jsx instead of card. And then create a function, and I'll call this cars. And I'm going to make sure over here to export default cars. Wonderful. Now, I said we want an array of 5 cars. So I'm going to say const cars, and notice that this is lowercase, so it's not going to interfere with really the naming convention. And I'll just kind of put this over multiple lines. So I'll just go with like Ford, and then I'll do a Tesla, and then I'll do, maybe you all know different car brands than me. I'm not really a car guy too much, so I don't really know many of these. Let's go BMW. And what's another one? Oh my goodness, Mercedes, I guess. Mercedes. This by no means is any indication of myself, and I do not prefer, I actually walk everywhere for the most part and take the transit, so not really a car person. But hopefully those are all car names that you probably have heard before. Now the goal of this is to actually return a paragraph for each of these cars. So if I do a return, how do I actually do that? Well, let's think for a second, right? What we basically want is this. This is what we want. Let me, I guess, make a comment for this just so it's a bit easier to notice. We would have, for example, a P tag, and then we would have Ford, and then a P tag. And this would close, right? And then we would have Tesla, right? And then we had dot, like it would have all of them. So we need a way to actually return all of these. So I'm going to wrap all of these in a fragment, just so I have something that, because I can't return 4 separate or 5 separate P tags. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of ways to do this. And then we're going to look at more optimal ways because you're probably going to be like, oh, this seems kind of weird. So the most obvious way is kind of just to index into this array. So let's try that. So I'm going to say I want a p tag, and I'm going to make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. This first one, I'm going to say I want to put some JavaScript in here, and I want cars at 0, which is the first car in the cars array, which is going to be Ford, which is going to grab that string and it's going to shove it in between these p tag brackets. So we're going to have Ford. Okay. Now I'm going to do that once for each of these paragraph tags. I'm going to do one there, one there, one there, and one there. But these are all going to be Ford. So I'm going to change this to 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. Now if I save this, I want you to think. It actually unformatted my array of strings, but hopefully you can still read that. I want you to think, is this going to work? All right. Well, right now it's not going to work because I don't actually have it imported, but assuming I have it imported, do you think this is going to work? So let's import this. I'm going to comment this one out. I'm going to say import cars from cars.jsx. And again, this is in main.jsx. And instead of card over here, I'm going to put cars. So we're telling React to please render only the cars component and kind of ignore anything else in our application. So let's see if this works. I'm going to switch back to Chrome. And indeed, we do actually see this working. We have Ford, Tesla, Volvo, BMW, and Mercedes. So that works pretty well, right? So if I open up this div, you can see that those 5 different paragraphs are actually all in there, all flattened out because of the fragment. Now, let's switch back to our JSX here. If you look at this code, right, you're probably thinking, oh, that looks kind of gross, right? Maybe you're not thinking that, but if you do think that, then I wouldn't blame you at all. Now, one thing that you'll notice is there's a lot of repetition. Generally, that's not a good thing, right? We wouldn't want so much repetition in our code because imagine if I add a 6th car or a 7th car, or I remove cars, or I even make it so there's only 2 cars. Then my entire app might crash because I'm indexing into something that doesn't exist. Okay, potentially, depending on how we code our app. So we want this to work a little bit nicer and be less verbose because there's a lot going on here. So I'm actually going to get rid of this code here. Let's think about this. We know that we have an array of strings. We know that React can render a string, and it can also render JSX that has a string in it. So what happens if inside of this p tag, I say, I'm going to put some JavaScript, and I'm going to say cars.map, and for each car, I want to return the car. This looks a bit weird, but I'm just saying return the car, and this is an array. An array basically, this is kind of returning the same thing, right? Cars.map. This is actually the same thing as cars, but you'll see what we're going to do in a second. If I switch back here, you'll see that this actually just kind of makes a string that puts all of these as text nodes one after the other inside of this paragraph tag. So that's a bit weird. That's not really what we wanted. We wanted a separate paragraph for each of these. So what are we saying to React in this case? We're saying create a single paragraph, and inside of that paragraph, I want you to create and map over each of these strings and kind of return that string. And we know that React can render a text node if it's given a string. So it's effectively thinking that we want it to put one paragraph tag where there's 5 strings concatenated one after each other in that paragraph tag. So that's not really what we want. We want a paragraph tag for each string. So instead of putting this p tag outside, I'm going to actually tell React, hey, instead of just returning a string, I want you to return a paragraph with car inside of it, just like that, right? So I want you to think for a second, is this going to work? Let's switch back, and I'm going to come here, and you'll see that we actually have car, right? So we're getting closer, right? This is 5 paragraph tags, but each has car. So why is that? Well, it's because we literally told React to put the string car inside of the paragraph tag. And remember, in order for React and JSX to evaluate JavaScript code, and not just a string, we need to surround that thing and evaluate it as JavaScript by using curly brackets, curly parentheses. So if I surround this car in parentheses, notice that the formatting for this actually changes, syntax highlighting changes. Now we're telling React, hey, return a paragraph tag, but evaluate what each car is as we're mapping through it, and put that variable inside of here, which turns out to be first Ford, then Tesla, then Volvo, BMW, and Mercedes. And return a paragraph for each of those. So at the end of the day, we're going to have an array, just like this, of these paragraph tags. Right? So that's what we're going to have. It's going to literally look like this, where we're going to have an array of these paragraph tags. And React is smart enough to know that if it sees an array, it can actually create a node for each of those for us. So if I switch back here after saving the file, and I switch to Chrome, we'll actually see that we do indeed see what we expect, which is our 5 different paragraphs for each of the car brands, which is pretty awesome. Now, this is a very, very powerful tool. This is why knowing functional programming techniques like map, filter, reduce, and things like that is extremely important when working with React. We're going to see more and more uses of this as we go through the course as well. Now, before we go to the bonus exercise, I do want to mention one thing. Personally, I am not a huge fan of putting a lot of JavaScript code inside of my JSX. So most of the time, what I do is I actually put the JavaScript code up here in this section, and then I actually refer to it down here in the actual JSX. So what does that mean? Well, I'm going to say const car p tags, for example. And what this is going to be is this is literally going to be this code. I'm going to cut it and I'm going to paste it right here. Okay, and I'll save the file just so that format's a bit nicer. Now I'm saying I'm going to map over each of these cars in the JavaScript, which is each of these, and I'm going to create a p tag. So car p tags is going to be an array of JSX p tags. And then what I can do is I can inject that right over here, just like that. And if I switch back after saving that, we'll notice that this is literally the exact same code. There's actually no difference visually in how this works. This is just a matter of preference and also kind of cleaning up and separating the concerns between what's being rendered and the actual logic to render that thing separately. You can also create a function to render this, which we'll see sometimes, or even a separate component, which we'll see when we get to component composition. Now, do you have to do it this way? No. I'd like us to get into better practices so that we can actually look at our code and kind of much better understand what's happening. Once our JavaScript, our JSX gets really, really long, you can imagine that having a bunch of maps and filters and reduces and other JavaScript code in there can get quite confusing quite quickly, especially if your functions are quite long. So what I like to do is kind of do all that logic beforehand and then simply put that in the actual JSX. And if I need to know how that variable got calculated or evaluated, I can just refer to it up above the JSX where it's actually evaluated. In this case, when we run the cars component and React runs a cars component, it's going to first create cars here. It's going to map over them, create an array of JSX here. Then it's just simply going to inject it over here. Very small difference, but it makes a big difference from a code readability point of view. All right, let's take a look at the bonus exercise. I couldn't resist and I had to make a bonus because we're going to need a lot of examples to get more practice with this. Okay. So let me kind of scroll down a little bit just so we can see all the instructions in one place at once, and my face is cutting it off. I apologize there. I'll scroll it down in a second. I'd like you to create a React project for this one again using Vite. Create a new JSX file again for this exercise called people.jsx. Then what I want you to do is create a people function inside of people.jsx that has a regular JavaScript array. But instead of strings this time, like we saw with the cars, I want each to be an object. So each thing in this array to be an object, and I want there to be two objects. Three objects, which I'll mention in a second. But each object has to have two keys. Okay, so objects have keys and values, a name and an age for the keys, and you can make up any name and age for these three people that you want. So we want to have at least 3 of these people objects in the array. So this is an array of objects where each object has these 2 keys, a name and an age for each of those people objects. Okay. Now I want you to figure out, how would you make the JSX return an H1 with the name of the person with a p tag below it with the age of the person for each person inside of this array of objects. Then, as with the other functions, export it and then import it into app or main, replace app, and then make sure it actually displays these people correctly. So what we should have is really 6 different elements, 3 H1s with the name and 3 P tags. So it's H1P, 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 where each of those H1P combos is the name and age of each of the people inside of this array of objects. So that's a lot to kind of go on. Definitely pause the video or read these instructions quite clearly. Hopefully that makes sense. I'll give you a chance to try this out. This is definitely a bit more complex, a lot more going on, and this is going to give us great practice for once we start building more complicated components together. Okay, so I'm going to create a new file here inside of source. I'll call this people.jsx, and this is going to be a function. We're going to call this people. And then I'm going to export default, and I'll export default people. There we go. And now I want to create a const people array. I'll just do this in lowercase, where each of these is an object, and it's going to have a name property. So for example, I could have like Iron Man, and then an age property. And I don't know how old Iron Man is. Let's just say Iron Man is like 30. Maybe he's older. And we want 3 of these. Okay, so I'm going to create 3 objects inside of this array. So we're going to have 3 people. So after Iron Man, let's do, I don't know, let's do Godzilla. Godzilla's not a person, but why not? How old is Godzilla? I don't know, 9,000. Why not? And then we'll go with, who else do I know? Goku. How old is Goku from Dragon Ball Z? I don't know. I think he changes ages depending on where he is. Let's just say Goku is 300 years old. Why not? Okay, so now we have our people array. How are we going to return an H1 for each of these? So just to be super clear, what we want to do is return an H1, for example, with Iron Man, right? And then we want to have a P tag with the age of 30 right below Iron Man. We want one of these for each of our people. And if we were to add more people, it should just kind of work. All right, so what we're gonna return, and I'm gonna return some, a bunch of lines of code in here. So I'm gonna put some fragment in there, and inside of the fragment, let's see what we actually want to do. React always, or my pretty always kind of changes my formatting. Let me just undo that so it's a bit more clear. All right, so we want to map over the people. And we know we can map over people because people is an array. And then for each of those, we want to return JSX that has 2 things in it, an H1 and a P. All right. So there's quite a lot of kind of stuff going on. So let's just one step at a time. So we're going to say people.map, and we're going to grab each person. And notice how this is kind of not being syntax highlighted correctly, and that's because we need to do this in curly brackets. So it's evaluated as JavaScript code, not just text. People.map each person. And for each person, what do I want to do? I'm actually going to use curly brackets here because there's quite a lot of code, and I'm going to make sure I add a return statement instead of a one-liner. I want to return some JSX that has both the name and then the paragraph after it. So I'm going to say return, and I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to return some JSX. All right. And inside of here, and this is a fragment. So again, we can't return 2 things at once. We need to have a fragment inside of there because that's the kind of parent. It depends sometimes how you do this. The entire component of, or the other return statement here needs to be wrapped in a fragment or a div at least. But over here, it's less necessary, but I usually just do it out of habit because a lot of time you're going to want to kind of reuse that in different places. So I always kind of just wrap things in one element. And in this case, we'll see the difference in a second. Sometimes it works, sometimes it won't work, depending on the context. But to get back to what we were doing, we're going to have an H1 in here, and we're going to have, well, what is person? Each person is going to be one of these objects, right? So it's an array that we're mapping through, and we're going to get an object. So I want to put the name first and the age. So how do I grab the name? Well, I'm going to evaluate this as JavaScript, person.name. And then I'm going to put a p tag after this. And this is going to be person.age. Okay. So hopefully that works. That should be it, right? So we're mapping over all the people, grabbing each person, and then we're going to get back an array of these things. And each of them is going to be dynamic because we're mapping over people, which each person is going to be one of these objects. So we should get Iron Man 30, Godzilla 9000, Goku 300. Okay, so we have that exported. Let me switch back to main here. I'm going to just comment this one out here. I'm going to import people from /people, and I'm going to change cars here to people, not purple, people, and I'll save that. Okay, now moment of truth. Let me switch back to Chrome, and there we go. All right, so it actually works. That's pretty cool. We have H1P, H1P, H1P for each of those items. Now, if I come back here, just to kind of show you some cases where the fragments are useful and not useful. For example, I could also wrap these all in a div. That's another reason why I like to do fragments here, so I can add things later much easier without kind of things getting formatted all over the place. And now each of these is wrapped in its own div, which is quite nice, right? So that's one way to do things. If I totally just get rid of this, and let's say I don't want that. In this case, you'll see that, as I mentioned, JSX expression must only have one parent element. So we're actually not going to be able to do that because we have to have a single return from every JSX expression, or a single element return from every JSX expression where it's just one parent, right? So whether that's a div or whether it's a section, or in this case, a fragment, we generally need something like this. I'm going to get rid of those divs because I just want each of them to be in there because I'm not going to be styling it. If I did need to style it, I would have to put some kind of container around each of these to target it, because we can't style fragments, because when we actually put this into the browser, as we know, it gets kind of erased and flattened out. Okay, now that was quite a lot, right? As you can see, this is quite complex code. And to wrap up this video, I'm just going to move this out here. So I'm just going to say const people, let's just say cards is equal to that. And then I'm going to actually just put people cards in here. Okay, and that refactor is going to result in the exact same code. But now, if we were having a lot of JavaScript or a lot of JSX being returned from this function, imagine that it's just like, you know, a couple dozen lines of JSX that was making up this component, then I wouldn't have to kind of deal with reading too much JavaScript code at once and scrolling through a bunch of stuff. If I was interested in people cards, I could just come back up here and actually see how that's actually calculated. All right, so I hope you found these exercises valuable. I know some of these get definitely quite tricky quite quickly, but I encourage you to practice, play around with these, change things around, and see if you can, not only break things, but kind of add things to each of these just to make sure that your intuitions are correct as you're adjusting these things. The whole purpose of this exercise is to get more muscle memory going so that when we're actually going through the more complicated exercises, but also even the videos, some of these concepts can hopefully stick a bit deeper in your brain, so that we're not kind of wondering kind of what the base or the fundamentals are for each of these concepts. So these fundamentals are going to carry us really, really far. So definitely spend time to make sure you understand these exercises. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd love it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear in the comments as well, what did you think of these exercises? Were they too easy? Were they too hard? Did you have any trouble with any of them? Did you do anything slightly differently than what I showed? Or did you just generally have any questions about any of this stuff? What we're going to do in the next video together is go over events, and we're going to stick with components again, simple components without state, and we're going to start introducing things on top. In this case, we're going to introduce how events work, and we went through events in the DOM videos previously. So we're going to see how it works in the context of React and some of the small differences that we need to deal with, and we're actually starting to make some interactive components for the first time. I'm actually super excited for that. I can't wait to get to that video. I'll see you there. See you later.